Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name's Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management, as well as the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Brandon Freed back to our podcast. Brandon is one of the nation's leading experts on air freight and cargo security. And with more than 40 years of experience, Brandon represents the industry and the association by serving on several federal advisory committees, including the TSA Aviation Security Advisory Committee, the U.S. Department of Commerce Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness as well. Brandon has also served 3 terms on the CBP Commercial Operations Advisory Committee. While still a forwarder, he joined the Airforwarders Association and was soon elected chairperson following that in 2001. He also served as 2 consecutive terms as chair and remained an active member of the board of directors. In 2005, Brandon sold his forwarding company and was appointed to his current role as executive director of the Airforwarders Association. He also represents forwarder interests as chair of the advisory board of the Cargo of Network Services and IATA Company. And in Washington, he serves as the public face of the Airforwarders Association, testifying in Congress and also working with the Department of Homeland Security. Brandon, welcome back to our podcast.
Jeff, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been too long. So there's a lot of different directions we can go in here, Brandon. But why don't we just sort of start at the top from an air cargo perspective? And that simply would be, how do you sort of assess the current state of the air cargo sector in terms of things like year-to-date volumes, service levels, things along those lines?
Yeah, it's a great question because there have been so many changes and so much uncertainty. But year-to-date volumes they're modestly up over 2024, but certainly on the air cargo side, the de minimis, the low value import elimination has had an impact. Capacity was at one point difficult to find because there was so much e-commerce related business, and has obviously been curtailed because we stopped de minimis exemptions out of China. In terms of passenger flights, we've seen capacity stabilizing, and service levels are improving, but cost pressures are still there. This is a pretty complex and sensitive market to policy shifts. We've had a 90-day reprieve through August 12th on the tariffs,
Hmm.
whereas China now they're still at 30%, which is no small amount, but at least it's got the freight flowing again. So what you have is a lot of these ocean carriers had stopped or canceled, blanked their sailings into the United States, and those are resuming right now. And what we think is going to happen is that as we get closer to that August 12th deadline, air cargo is going to surge as shippers, manufacturers want to beat or front load goods again, much the same we saw here in the spring, back into U.S. warehouses because no one knows what's going to happen. It's just, every 15 minutes could be a change coming out of the White House. It's had a profound effect on the industry and continues to do so.
No, no question about it. The uncertainty level is something else to be sure across all supply chain verticals. Um, so you had mentioned de minimis, and we'll jump back to that in a minute. Obviously, this week has been really eventful on the tariff front when we look at the U.S. Court of International Trade ruling against the White House, basically in terms of its rationale, if you will, for applying
Mhm.
tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Act. Um, so, and then the White House, as obviously most people know by now, appealed it. It was granted a stay. So tariffs are still in effect for how long, who knows at this point. But when you look at the developments of this week, Brandon, I guess maybe we look at it on 2 different fronts. One being uh, the current front in terms of how tariffs continue to impact and affect air cargo operations, and if the tariffs were to go away, what that means as well. I mean, there's a lot to sort of unpack there. How would you view sort of those two situations?
Well, I'll say generally speaking, initially yesterday, I'm sure a lot of our members and manufacturers and shippers saw the first ruling out of the Court of International Trade as being favorable, but it was quickly temporarily stayed.
Yes.
Jeff, this just creates more uncertainty for forwarders and their shipper customers. There's more complexity and confusion. And this uncertainty is creating challenges for planning and of course, figuring out what the pricing is going to look like. Um, the tariffs we've seen during this 90-day reprieve, we've seen ocean freight rates upwards of 17% increase on the
Yes.
Trans-Pacific lanes. That's pretty substantial. Air freight rates are likely to follow as well. But what I'm concerned about most of all is consumer uncertainty. And companies are reticent to make big manufacturing and buying decisions, knowing that the climate is so uncertain, so tenuous, that anything can happen at any time. That this is going to have an adverse impact for a while, and it's
Yeah.
a concern to our members.
No, absolutely. And you had just touched upon, Brandon, the consumer element there. And obviously that really speaks to the heart of de minimis, which is really geared towards consumers, or those low value 800 under $800 shipments, fast fashion, Sheen, Temu, etc., all very e-commerce driven. Um, much has been made of what's been happening with it in terms of the changes. And we don't need to peel the onion on sort of the percentages and the dollar amounts. We can address it at a bit of a more of a top level. Um, the removal of the de minimis exemption, while it went into effect May 2nd, where has that left things? I know things are changing now, and obviously now here it looks like it might be back on the table. There's a lot going on. How
Yeah.
what's been communicated to your membership? How do you guys sort of view and assess what's going on there?
So, that's a great question because we at the Air Forwarders Association, we have the gamut of freight forwarders. We have the small Fred's freight types, and then we've got the big intergalactic types, the Cunanagles, the DSVs, and
Yeah.
the CH Robinsons, and everyone's represented. We have a big tent. And so not all our members were heavily engaged or invested in e-commerce, but some were. Some had made significant investments in e-commerce shipment processing, and I'm concerned about them, obviously. And others were concerned about the lack of capacity that e-commerce shipments created on the airlines. Uh, so, we have diversity of opinion somewhat, but the reality is that it's adding cost, it's increasing the compliance burden, it's disrupting the fulfillment models, and it's causing our customers, the shippers, to reevaluate their sourcing strategies. And with that, freight forwarders are advisors many times. So we're being called in by customers to, just answer questions. What if we left China and went to Cambodia and did our manufacturing out of there, provided that they can? Don't forget, China's had 40 to 50 years to establish a tremendous manufacturing infrastructure, and these other countries aren't going to catch up right away. Even India is not going to be able to catch up as quick as everyone hopes. So, that's adding to the complexity. Um, and this is an example of how trade policy changes can ripple through the logistics business pretty quickly. I can tell you on the de minimis, look. Online ordering is here to stay. You don't believe it?
Yes. Yes.
Come to my house. I'll show
Or
you.
mine. Or mine.
Right. So, but the reality is that it's going to look different. And these companies, the Shimus, I'm sorry, the Timus and the Xi'ans and the
Yeah.
Amazons, and they're just a few. There are thousands of others involved in it. They saw this coming. And a lot of them have recreated their sourcing strategy. Maybe they're bringing it in via ocean, storing it in U.S. warehouses. So they'll go and they'll bring everything in as a formal clearance and they'll make distributions out of U.S. warehouses. Granted, their costs will go up, but there'll be some efficiencies derived. I can tell you that on Capitol Hill, the House of Representatives passed their budget last week, and the de minimis exemption is if it survives and the final legislation is gone. It's going to stop from all countries. That's a
Yeah.
provision within that bill. We don't know what the Senate's going to do with it, so obviously it's hard to say at this point. But
Yeah.
e-commerce, I would say in short, e-commerce is here to stay. It's just going to look different.
No, no doubt about it. Um, I wanted to touch upon the current situation over at the FAA, Brandon, just as it regards regarding air traffic control staffing issues, which have really been a hot topic lately, and sort of what can be done to address it. What's the AFA's view on sort of all things FAA at the moment?
Yeah, well, we don't like bottlenecks.
Right.
Certainly ongoing controller shortage and all the bottlenecks that we saw as an example up in Newark is affecting it ripples through the aviation sector. You block out a major runway anywhere in the United States, you're going to have a ripple effect. But, the FAA has had challenges for quite some time. Automation's been one of them, and we all know that. And, they're working on 1960s and 70s technology and they want to change it over. I would say this, that we might not have one of the most modern systems in the world, but we have one of the safest. Now, granted, there are exceptions. We had the Reagan crash, and obviously that needs to be addressed and remedied as to what caused that. But the reality is that the system needs an updating. Right now, there are three controllers on average in the tower, and the FAA says they have a goal of 14. They're short 3,000 nationwide. It's a challenging career. They need to find the federal funding to recruit and train and certify controllers, but also make it a better career experience. You burn people out quickly, but if you modernize the system, and you make it more worker friendly over time, people will look at it as a beneficial career. And don't forget, you got to pay these guys well, and you got to make sure they get the benefits. And they're federal employees. And right now, being a federal employee is pretty scary.
Right. Yeah.
I live in Washington and I have neighbors who are federal employees and a couple of them have lost their jobs. So don't think that's not on their mind. But we're concerned because in the end, as I said, we don't like bottlenecks. Bottlenecks create flight delays delay our shipments. And
Yeah.
that's not sustainable for us.
Absolutely. And speaking of timely shipments and whatnot, um, how do you see things shaping up for peak season? I imagine that given all the tariff confusion, it's probably a bit of a different outlook than prior years.
Yeah, we were hoping that 2025 outperformed 2024. It probably still will, but we're not going to be at those uh, below pre-pandemic norms. I think that the airlines are going to be more strategic on where they fly. Planes can be redeployed quickly, so where you had flights out of China, they're going to go to other places for the most revenue potential. Uh, Freighters, air freighters are going to play a significant role,
Mhm.
especially into the summer as we talk about that surge. You're not going to have the passenger capacity for freight, passenger belly capacity. So these freighters are going to be needed. And uh, again, you've got this black cloud of consumer uncertainty. I always go back to the consumer. If the consumer is bullish, I'm bullish, and so are our members. But right now, that's uncertain. But I think that you'll see rising volumes in tech and fashion in the promo sectors, and special projects and things like that. But again, the geopolitical and economic events could still disrupt the outlook. And
Yeah.
anything can happen at any time. Um, and this is a little bit of Brandon's political commentary, maybe not necessarily that of the Airforwarders Association, but it doesn't have to happen. There are ways they can temper this a little bit
Yeah.
and still come up with results. But that's
No,
just Brandon's opinion.
no, I hear you, and it'll be very interesting to see how it all shakes out. Um, what are you hearing, Brandon, from your membership in terms of things along the lines of their biggest concerns or challenges, for that matter?
Yeah, well, the tariffs, the de minimis, TSA rules. Don't forget, we still have a significant security obligation to the Transportation Security Administration. So we're underway at this point in time with they're revising two significant security programs there. We're expecting revisions on a third shortly. So we're dealing with that as well. But I think generally speaking, given this uncertain policy environment, it's harder to forecast demand. We're also looking at the things that we've been following. We have a big radar screen, by the way, at the Air Forwarders Association. So cybersecurity threats, especially for the small and medium-sized forwarders, keeping them out of trouble, and you've got security issues with now state actors involved. They say that Russia was behind the incendiary bomb plot that happened last August. We've had to increase our security vigilance and our requirements. We're now providing more data to the U.S. for Customs and Border Protection, even before the shipments leave other countries. The other thing is technology, the impact of new technology and integration. AI. How's AI going to impact and automate processes? Where does it fit in the overall business? And so what we're seeing now, this is funny, Jeff. This was a business that relied on Selectric typewriters for years.
Yeah.
But we're making up for lost time. I mean, a lot of our members, even the small guys, they're buying automation. The customers are demanding it. It's giving them more efficiencies. They're increasing transparency. We're still dealing with labor shortages. Recruitment, the business remains tough to a degree. And you have a lot of consolidation of some airlines, steamship operators. That's a big concern. Overall, though, what we're seeing here, the environment we're currently in is increasing operational costs, and that is keeping our members up at night.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, no doubt about it. Um, in terms of now, things are obviously all over the place when it comes to supply chain, freight transportation, logistics. But from a modal perspective, uh, where might you see the air cargo sector, say, over the next 3 to 5 years, Brandon?
Well, I think you're going to see increased digitalization. That's for sure, as I just said. And, this AI thing, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But, there are some interesting use cases for it. The booking platforms are becoming more prevalent and more interesting, real-time tracking, things like that. I'm concerned about a few things. The Air Forwarders Association has been very instrumental in addressing airport truck congestion in the cargo areas, such that when the FAA reauthorization law was passed last year, we worked hard to get a provision in that calls for a government accountability office study on the issue. We got several U.S. senators and congressmen to back us on it. It's something that you don't see. Most of the public doesn't understand that in these airports, you've got trucks backing up, waiting hours to get to a freight terminal to either drop off or recover a freight in a business where we sell time for a living. We can't be waiting around for shipments because the road structures or the building infrastructure or there's a lack of automation for these truck drivers prevents us from getting the cargo. So we're pushing for that. And don't forget, here's something else, Jeff, that we have to realize. Air cargo, even when we get through all the craziness that's going on in the policy perspective right now
Yeah.
in politics, air cargo is scheduled to increase 4% per year over the next 20. And that's a lot of volume.
Yeah,
And
that's significant.
it's significant. And so these airports that were built 40, 50 years ago, and there or the cargo areas were built that long ago, there was no 53-foot tractor trailer at the time. Now they're commonplace at these airports. It backs up the roads and we've got to start addressing that, but it's going to require federal money. And that may be building new road systems or adopting or paying for automation that provide appointment setting platforms for the drivers. Lots of things. Um, there's a push for sustainability, emissions, and whatnot. But in this administration, the previous administration, it was high on the priority list. Not so much on this administration.
Yeah.
But we're gonna, that's still gonna play a role. I mean, don't forget, the current administration won't be around for forever. And I see because other countries are requiring that. And Jeff, the customers are requiring it.
Hmm.
So when you sit down with a customer now and you're a freight forwarder, the customer's saying, what are you doing about your sustainability? How are you making sure that you're addressing this issue? Because our stockholders want to know. And it often plays a big role in the RFP process.
Uh,
And I think that policy and regulation is going to continue to play a major role. So our role here at the Air Forwarders Association is just to keep members informed, prepared, and represented. Be there. You know what they say here in Washington, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. We don't want to be on the menu.
No, of course not. Um, wow, that's a great way of putting it, Brandon. And I just had one last question I wanted to ask, something I thought of just a moment ago, and it had to do with it was an estimate, I believe it was from uh IATA that found that, and I guess this sort of ties back to de minimis a little bit, but I thought it was interesting. It said that e-commerce currently averages 20% of air cargo business industry-wide, with the expectation of e-commerce to grow at least a third of all to a third of all cargo shipments, and adding that by 2027, e-commerce will probably likely become an $8 trillion market segment, with air cargo reaping a significant portion of that business. Now, this was analysis that came out closer to earlier in the year,
Hmm.
but on the surface, do you agree with that analysis, with that forecast, even amid sort of all the stop and start, push and pull of tariff driven actions at
Yeah.
this point?
Yeah, so I would say that I can't address the numbers, but I can tell
Right.
you it's directionally accurate.
Yes.
Your e-commerce, as I said, was here to stay. The e-commerce horse has already escaped the barn. Can't close the door. Did one
Right.
the impact. So, don't forget, Jeff, these other countries still have active e-commerce related trade lanes. And that's going to have a big impact. The US is what, just 13%. It's significant, but it's just things might be cooling off in the United States, but the US consumer is not going to stop buying online. So we're going to see an uptick in this. I can't tell you the numbers based on the fact that, US policy has changed and continues to change, and de minimis here was it could no longer may no longer play a role.
Yeah.
But they'll figure out a way to do it. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, Brandon, that 13%, that's the US's percentage of e-commerce
Global.
related air cargo trade.
That's just traded globally.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just want to make sure I was understanding that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great, great.
So
Yeah,
anyway, we're bullish on this business, and political headwinds aside, logistics is something that is always going to be needed, and our members are busy. I mean, just because volumes are slumping, our members. When I talked to them, I was at the CNS conference a couple weeks ago in Miami. When I talked to them, they said, "Look, we're challenged, but we're busy,
yeah, no
and that's
question
good."
about it. All right. Well, this brings us to the end of our time for today's podcast, Brandon. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to offer up a big thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you listening in, you want to learn a little bit more about the Air Forwarders Association, go ahead and look them up online. It's simply airforwarders.org. And for those of you on Twitter, please go ahead and give us a follow at Logistics Management, simply Logistics MGMT. And if you're not subscribed or signed up to our podcast, please go punch up Supply Chain 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts, and it will come right up, and you go ahead and subscribe right there. So thanks everybody, and have a great day, and we'll catch you next time.